Welcome to On the Bauble Podcast, episode 31. I'm your host, Sabasa J. Ueda, and with me is my co host, Yuki Lee Bender. Today, we're just going to be talking about the Chicago Brawl by Realm Games and MinMax Games that was held in Chicago. It was a classic constructor tournament. And we're also going to be doing our first impressions on our Outsiders draft. But before we go into that, how was your week, Yuki?
My week has been all right. Most of it has been Chicago. I left on the Thursday, I guess, and flew to Toronto. We drove down. So it's about a 4.5 hour flight or so. Then we drove down to Chicago from Toronto, which is it's like an 8 hour drive, but then you have to stop and get food and everything. So it's closer to like 10 hours, 9 or 10 hours. We did that. We got there around 6 and drafted on the Friday, played the event on the Saturday, and went home on the Sunday. We also did a team draft on the Saturday after the event, which was pretty fun. So we can talk about those drafts more later. But yeah, it's overall just been a lot of travel. Pretty fun weekend overall. Unfortunately, when I went, I thought I got sick. As soon as I got there, pretty much, I lost my voice. Like I was fine in the car, and then when we got there, I didn't have my voice anymore. Like I was doing the draft and I could barely talk. And then I felt pretty unwell, and I thought I might be getting sick, but within like an hour and a half of leaving, I felt a lot better. And I think it may have just been mostly allergies. I was just like very congested and just felt pretty terrible. So my voice is like mostly back now, but not quite 100%. So
Yeah, I can hear it right now that your voice is not 100% yet.
yeah, exactly. So fun weekend overall. It's still fun to play events and hang out with, like Nia, Isaac, Crute, and people like that. We kind of all went down together, but I definitely felt like I didn't play my best at the event. It was hard to just found it very hard to focus and very like I was missing a lot of things that I don't think I would normally miss. So yeah, how it goes.
No, that's fair. For myself, I was all I did was draft in Vancouver. Ended up doing two drafts with the Vancouver crew on Saturday night. I was trying to get into another draft on Saturday morning, but I didn't have access to a car, so I couldn't get there. And then just did a draft last night with at my local game store. So that was pretty good. It was pretty fun. Learned a lot of new things, and pretty excited to talk about that a little later in the show. But let's just move right into our main topic here. So this was the Chicago Brawl by Realm Games and MinMax Games. I'm assuming this was actually held by MinMax Games, right?
Yeah, so Realm Games is running a circuit of events, and the events basically feed into an invitational at the end of the year. The invitational is a 20K. And then I believe top four automatically gets an invite, and then you get points based on your placement. And like, I don't remember the exact breakdown, but the highest like 64 players or something in terms of points by the end of the season get an invite to the invitational. So pretty cool event series, and a lot of the invitationals are like basically battle hardens or close to it. And there's also some smaller like 1Ks that stores can host. So they're kind of doing like a sort of like what SCG used to do in Magic, where they like host this circuit that ends up feeding into itself. It's pretty cool.
Are you planning on playing any more events to try and qualify?
If it lines up and it's convenient to go, I will. But honestly, the qualification is pretty low priority. I don't think the date is finalized, but it's in Q4, and I'm usually working during that time. So there's like I was able to go to this because of spring break, and I could get back on Sunday for work. I ended up not going to work on Monday because I was just like couldn't talk at all. But yeah, in theory, I could have gone back to work on Monday. So that's kind of why I went. But I think on a more standard weekend, I just wouldn't be able to go at all. So yeah, probably not going to go unless it's just convenient in the summer or something. And it looks like a good event.
Yeah, it's a little hard to go to the East Coast in one weekend and come back for Monday to start working again.
Yeah, even though it's technically feasible, like you could do an overnight flight, often the problem is that there's not that many like a lot of the flights that I was looking at leave at like 3 or 4 kind of thing, and it's like, well, day 2 is on or the top 8 is on day 2, And depending on how long top 8 goes, like you just might not be able to make that flight. So
Yeah, you have to book on Monday evening or something like that. Monday morning depends if they even
yeah,
have a flight at that time.
yeah, and it's a long enough flight that usually like by the time you get back, you don't get back in time for work. Like you might get back around like noon kind of thing, but not in time for work.
So, looks like there was just over 110 players at the Chicago Brawl this weekend. How should we start with this? Let's just start with the meta breakdown. This is just like a Twitter post that I found. It's from T to Bo. Um, and looks like the most represented hero in this tournament was Dromai. We had 15 Dromais, 14 Azalea, 13 Lexi, 11 Oldham. Those were the four most represented heroes in this tournament. Is this what you saw in the top tables as well?
Yeah, more or less. I would say that I'm a little bit surprised by the 11 Oldham. I thought it was like closer to 7 or 8, kind of like Icelander, Uzuri, Katsu, and some of the others. But certainly at the top tables, there was a lot of Dromai, a lot of Azalea, some Lexi, and like just a mix of other stuff, honestly. But Azalea and Dromai in particular were very represented at the top tables, and even though Dromai didn't ultimately convert to top 8, there was a lot of them that were very close. And one of the people I traveled down with, Aaron Chance, was on Dromai and actually had a feature match against Levi for a win in the last round of Swiss. And that game was very close. And I think he got a little bit unfortunate to get like dominated by a Deadeye in a hand with 3D reacts. So he just like Levi just got to take his only action, and then he just then Chance just got fully time walked because he just had D reacts in hand, and then was stuck on D reacts. At least that's what he told me. I haven't watched the match, but he told me about it, and it sounded kind of rough. So I think that Dromai was, well, it was not in top 8, and it's easy to write it off. There was a lot at top tables, and it was doing pretty well. So I don't know if I can quite say that like the deck didn't perform.
Do you think the reason why there's so many Dromais is because a lot of the top players expected a lot of the Ranger, like Azalea and Lexi, and maybe it's like a meta pick to pick Dromai into this field?
From what I heard from the locals, it sounds like the Midwest really likes their Dromai, and there's a lot of people who just they play Dromai because they like it. I know that some people were picking it because of the favorable Ranger matchup as well, though. So I think it was a little bit of a mixed bag. But I think to some degree it was just people liking Dromai, being comfortable on it, and this was on release weekend. So I think for a lot of players, like they may not have either access to the new cards or they may not have enough reps on a new deck to really want to switch gears. So I think a lot of people just played what they wanted to play, and then some number of people were playing whatever they thought was strong.
I'm assuming the large Azalea and Lexi numbers were due to a new card in the set, most likely Codex of Frailty. What did you end up playing in this tournament?
I ended up bringing a Lexi list, in a lot of ways not too dissimilar from the list that top aided. I think Naib was on a Fuseless Lexi list as well. A lot of similar ratios. His list is kind of all over the place. Like there's a lot of one ofs and two ofs, and I don't know if he's just like trying new cards or he likes the variety. I'm not exactly sure like what the reasoning behind that was, but overall it's like similar ratios and I think a very similar game plan. So I think that the decks are relatively close, although there was a few differences for sure.
Sure. While we're on this topic, do you want to just go into what kind of deck you were playing? Like, were you on Ice Lexi, Tempo Lexi?
So I was on a Fuseless Lexi list. I can post the deck list in the comments. I'll read through the cards very briefly here. So there was 3 red Arctic Incarceration, 3 red Bolt and Shot, 3 Command and Conquer, 3 Death Touch, 3 Drill Shot, 3 Endless Arrow, 3 Falcon Wing, 3 Heat Seeker, 3 Infecting Shot, 2 Premeditate, 3 Remorseless, 3 Searing Shot, and 3 of a kind. That's at red. In yellows, I had 3 Bolt and Shot, 3 Codex of Frailty, 3 Codex of Inertia, 3 Rain Razors, and 3 Tar Pit Traps. And then in blue, I had 3 Bolt and Shot, 3 Drill Shot, 1 Energy Potion, 3 Infecting Shot, 3 Pathing Helix, 3 Searing Shot, and 3 Sedation Shot. Basically, this list is always running 42 to 45 arrows. I just wanted the consistency and the ability to block and play a mid-range deck. And the idea is that you are just kind of a good value deck because you are playing. I was playing Codex of Inertia into everything except for Ranger. And then I was playing also Codex of Frailty, Rain Razors, and Three of a Kind, which are all just really above rate cards. So as long as you are able to just get consistent value out of your hand, either by blocking if it's not a great hand or your opponent has on hits, or just attacking on rate, usually those, because you have so many power cards, you will usually come out ahead over top of your opponent, is kind of what I found. And you have a lot of good on hits with stuff like Endless Arrow, Heat Seeker, Infecting Shot, Remorseless. Like there's a lot of these like pretty nasty on hits that makes it, even though you kind of have less disruption than ice, your opponent can't fully go no blocks either unless they have like, I guess if they have like the most crazy hand ever, they can do it profitably. But a lot of the time, if they're actually not blocking you, you get too much value. And if they are only blocking you, you also kind of like just go over the top of them with a Rain Razor's turn. So I think it's like a very consistent, value-oriented deck that honestly has a lot of play into most of the field. I think Azalea can be a tough matchup though, and Dromai is probably a matchup I should have practiced a little bit more. I didn't play test it at all. I wasn't expecting so much Dromai, and I kind of got caught off guard. I think I also made some mistakes in those games, and yeah, could have done better there.
That's fair. That's fair. At least in our local meta, we have very little Dromai, and yeah, I don't even think our like if we go to like a local army, I don't think anyone plays Dromai in our meta, do we?
Yeah, not really. Like maybe sometimes Lucas will be playing Dromai, but yeah, there's really not a lot of Dromai in our area. And I had sort of like watched some games played by Isaac on a very similar list into Dromai, and they looked relatively close. Like I think Lexi has, I think that this list has quite a bit of game into Dromai. You have 6 poppers between the CNC and the death touches, and you can kind of just, you present enough damage that you can usually push through. But I think I made some poor decisions around some of like when to kill dragons and which dragons to hit. And I think that really cost me. Maybe just playing like a handful of games would have probably given me a lot more equity into the matchup. Just I don't think I've played it since Uprising came out. So
That's fair. That's fair. So I guess the most interesting card that at least I can see is the 2 copies of Premeditate. Is that intentional 2 copies, or is it I couldn't find a third copy, 2 copies?
it's mostly a space issue. There's just so many good cards in Lexi, and it's not a card I wanted everywhere. I like it into decks where you kind of want to keep extending. Like it's good into Oldhim, where you kind of need to spend your whole big hand to get them off of an arsenal if they're playing defensively. But then you're often stuck in a spot where you don't have an arsenal and you can't continue the pressure. Whereas with Premeditate, it kind of still lets you, like, it works really well in a 6 card hand, but it also ensures that you're going onto a 5 card hand on the following turn. So I like it in those spots where you just kind of need to keep pushing damage through a deck that's trying to block you out.
Okay, okay. So it is an intentional 2 copies.
Yeah, I'd say if I had infinite space, I'd probably have the 3 copies. There's just only so much space in the deck. So
Okay, would you play a third now that you know the meta, or would you still keep it at 2?
I'd probably still keep it at 2. It's a card that's good in some spots and not everywhere. Yeah, overall, I was actually pretty happy with the list. I was hoping to get a little more data on how good I thought it was, but it was sort of, I think I was making too many mistakes in a lot of the games to really get a solid read. But it felt consistent. Like it didn't let me down. You're just able to block so well, and you don't really get the non-arrow hands with 42 arrows and then codexes and Three of a Kinds digging you towards arrows, and you also have Quiver of Rustling Leaves. Like it's just very, very hard to ever brick and feel like you're not in the game with this deck, which is part of the reason I took it.
I guess another question that a lot of people will have is how good was Quiver? Quiver of the Rustling Leaves.
It's a little bit of a high variance card, and it's not something that you get value out of every game. When you do, though, it's very good. I'd say the most common spot that I get value out of it is on Three of a Kind, because you sometimes have extra resources and you can just pretty freely like try and turn a blue into an extra arrow, and it functions kind of like a second copy of bracers, of the bullseye bracers, where you can just get like an extra load effectively. And when it does that, it's really good. There's also some spots where like maybe you have a blue arrow left to arsenal, but you're in a spot where you're kind of behind and you know that blue arrow is not going to be enough, and you can just try to go off the top and hope you hit something better, if you know that you are that far behind. And I found myself doing that, I think, in 1 or 2 spots. And with the arrow density, it's not guaranteed, but it is like over 2/3 of the time you're going to hit an arrow. So it's decent.
Yeah, that's pretty good, honestly. If it's 2/3 of the time on a turd where you just have no other way of using resources off three of a kind, that seems pretty good equity, honestly.
Yeah, it's just like a lot of free upside. Just I think the fact that it's like essentially a free slot makes it worth it, even if it comes up in, if in half of your games it ends up giving you one extra arrow attack, that's pretty good. That means like it's worth like what, like 2.5 on average, which is nice for an extra equipment slot.
Okay, let's move on to the top eight. So for the top eight of this tournament, we had a pretty diverse top eight, honestly. The only repeating deck was Azalea. There was two copies of Azalea in the top eight. One Icelander, an Azuri, a Dash, a Lexi, an Oldhim, and a Briar. Is there any decks in particular you wanted to talk about here?
Yeah, I think it was just like interesting to see such a widespread. Azalea obviously doing very, very well for herself. I do think that one of those Azaleas was quite close to being a Dromai in top eight, so it could have been extremely diverse. I'm sort of curious to see if this is going to continue, if Azalea is going to keep doing really well. Azalea feels like this very polarized deck where when it's doing its thing, it feels like one of the best things you can be doing in Fab. Like it's almost like Starvo, where it just read in the ledgers you can't use your hand, and then you get inertia and you lose your arsenal as well. So when it's doing that, it feels almost unstoppable. And then you also just get these hands that really don't do much, and you can block with them to kind of help mitigate it, but it does feel like you are subject to the ranger hands a little bit, especially like the all non-arrow hands that are not very functional are a problem. So if Azalea is off of her arsenal, she tends to struggle. But ultimately, it seemed like a lot of people were on very similar lists. I think Brody Spurlock, who ended up winning, was on a fairly similar list to Levi, who he met in the finals. Biggest difference was Levi has some extra D reacts. So I think there's like a couple sideboard slots that you can figure out depending on what you want to target. But I do think that in general, like the suite of pumps and the suite of arrows is mostly figured out, and there might just be a little bit of fine tuning with arrows that come here and there. It was really cool to see also Sam Dando do well on Azuri. Um, the list was sort of interesting. It's a little bit different than other lists that I've tried. It looks weird on paper, and I'm curious to see how it plays. It's very red line. I think it has 6 blues in total and a whole bunch of attack reactions in it as well. And also has some D reacts that I can side into. One thing I've noticed in some of my testing is that Azuri seems like a pretty decent value deck. And it's almost hard for me to like say exactly where it comes from, because it feels like we kind of talked about the idea that it's like often doing 12s, but I think that just the disruption is pretty solid, I guess, between Leave No Witnesses, Shakedown, CNC, Death Touch, and Codex of Frailty. Buying back those effects just ends up giving you very, very consistent value when your deck also just almost all 3 blocks. So the deck is pretty good at just like keeping up and keeping the games very, very close. So it's cool to see that.
Yeah, I think this Azuri list is pretty cool. I was playtesting a little bit of CC this week, and I played one game against Oldhim, and I had to give up halfway through because the game was over halfway through the game. I didn't have Vambrace of Determination in the deck, and I was just like, "How do I get through this?" The Crown of Seeds, and Vambrace of Determination is a messed up card in this deck. Like it lets your spiders bite through, and when that happens, when Oldhim has to use a card to block spiders bite, man, Azuri gets to deck them out.
Yeah, Vambrace is a very impressive card. I also saw a number of Katsus running it. I've seen this in quite a few people's deck lists, and I think that it's surprising how effective it is against Oldhim. It's really good whenever you're presenting breakpoints, especially if you have, if you like naturally have extra resources floating. It just means they can't rely on their crown. And if those breakpoints have on hits, it's extra scary because it just means that like the threat of activation almost means that they can't rely on it. Like you can't block a Like if it's Katsu, you can't block like the third mask trigger with your if it's coming in if it's like a leg tap for 4, like Kadachi Kadachi leg tap for 4, you can't just block it with Crown because they'll vamp brace and draw a card. So just that like threat of activation and meaning that you can't like use it to stop those breakpoints with on hits is just makes it really really strong.
Yeah, it's not like this card is not that good against other decks that's not Oldhim, honestly, unless they have some kind of prevention effect. If they have no prevention effect, you clearly run either Flick Knives or something else. Probably just Flick Knives because it just has a block value on it. But Vambrace against decks with like consistent prevention, it's night and day. Like if you haven't tried it yet, you should definitely try it. Honestly, I feel like Vambrace of Determination might become one of the more played generics if Oldhim stays popular in this format.
Yeah, I think I kind of agree. It actually really hurts the Fatigue Oldhim deck. And this is a card that if you don't own it, I would consider owning it because not only do I think it's good against Oldhim, but next set we are getting, I think it's confirmed that we're getting a Light Illusionist again. And sort of makes sense that there will probably be Spectral Shields. I guess I don't know that for sure, but it was a pretty big part of the game plan before. So if Spectral Shields and Ward becomes a thing, Vamp Braces is going to be very good there as well.
Oh yeah, if you next prevention effect that prevents physical damage this turn prevents one less of that damage. Okay. Yeah, so it would only stop the first ward. Okay, so it doesn't work like
Yeah.
some of the other like can't be prevented effects where it pops all of the wards in one shot.
No, yeah, it doesn't do that, but it will still pop 2, which is like still pretty good.
It's pretty insane.
Yeah. The difference between popping 1 and 2 each time is a pretty big difference. So I don't know. It will depend a lot on what that deck will look like, but it wouldn't surprise me if this card ends up being relevant there as well. It also just has this mode of paying 1 resource and you can block with it. It gets Blade Break 1 and it only blocks for 1, so it's not great. But I've seen situations where like you just have a Tunic up and you can use your Tunic counter and this to block for 2, and like that's just enough to keep 1 extra card and that can win you the game. So like it's not the main mode of this card, but it's better than not having it by quite a bit.
Yeah, if it didn't have that text or when it does is big difference.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess let's just talk really briefly about the finals. The finals actually end up being Azalea versus Azalea. It was, sorry, the names were Levi and Brody who who played the mirror. Did you end up watching this game or do you know how it went?
I've watched a little bit of it. I know that Levi was on an IP2. I believe there was what I've heard is that there was a problem with the previous game where there was like a dominated like an isolate that has dominate on it from Azuri, and then Azuri activation got activated and there was a D-React played from hand. They were playing very, very fast in that game. And I think both players just missed it. And he ended up getting, Levi ended up getting an IP2. Probably just honestly a mistake. Cards are new. People are not used to it. Pretty understandable, especially when you consider just how fast they were playing. It was like blazing speed. But I know Levi went in with an IP2 and I heard the game was quite close. But I haven't actually sat down and watched all of it. I think I got partway through of it and then I ended up falling asleep. So
That's fair. That's fair. I didn't know that Levi had an IP2. I did hear about that the issue with the Azuri versus Azalea match earlier, and I didn't know there was an IP2 issued for the next game. And we already talked about the Azalea list a little bit. So, do you have any opinions about this classic constructed format?
it's still early. There's a lot to see. I think it's cool to see Azuri being a major player potentially when a lot of people were counting it out. I think there's a lot to explore with that deck and there's a lot of different ways you can build it. So it'd be interesting to see how people put it together. But I mean, it got pretty solid results on the release weekend, which is saying something about the deck, I think. It was also really cool to just see just how diverse the metagame was. I'm curious if that will continue. It feels like people might have been playing what they wanted to play to some degree, but I think that undoubtedly the meta has been shaken up quite a bit compared to before. I think Vamp Braces does make Oldhim still a deck, but decently, like a decent amount weaker. There's a lot of decks that can beat that deck if they want to now. And I also think that Icelander suffers a lot, specifically into Azalea. Just you're a deck that often, like, you think about what it's doing is wanting to play Wounded Bull, and then it either blocks with a card and arsenals a card, or it blocks with two cards. But if you're coming in with Dominate and Inertia, you're just making it so that they can't use their whole hand consistently, and you're making it really hard for them to like arsenal those disruption pieces and keep you kind of from being as efficient as you can. So I think all of that just means that the Azalea ends up having a pretty solid matchup, and I think we saw this from um, Brody actually beating Michael Hamilton not once but twice, once in Swiss and once on top four, top eight, top four, I think. Anyways, they played in Swiss and in top eight somewhere. And Brodiac, they were close games. I haven't fully watched them again. They were pretty long, but yeah, I think same as Aeolus taking down not just any Icelander, but Michael Hamilton twice says something about the matchup for sure.
Talking about Azalea, so we have a very powerful card that got released in Outsiders, Codex of Frailty. Do you think this card's gonna get hit on the ban list soon enough?
I would be shocked to see it go before the Pro Tour. I think that the set is just too new. It's very clear that this card is one of the best things you can be doing right now. Like, it's just one of the most powerful cards on Right. It enables a lot of very powerful play patterns. Is it too good? Maybe. But I'm willing to see like where this shakes out. I think that Ranger and Assassin are both classes that were a little bit underpowered, and giving them a powerful card that lets them do some cool stuff is not necessarily a bad thing. So it's a card that, like, if it eventually gets banned at some point, I wouldn't be shocked, but I also don't know if that's going to be right away. I think people calling for bans already are definitely jumping the gun on this card.
I see. I have a feeling this card is gonna get banned pretty quickly. I don't know. I don't think it's gonna be before the Pro Tour. I'll be shocked if they do that kind of banning.
Same.
But this card is broken for sure. Like, there's no question that this card is this card has to be the most powerful card in the game right now.
Yeah, I think I agree with that.
It's like this card is almost or just as broken as Awakening when that card was a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody can dispute that the card is very powerful. I think it's just ultimately like,
just make the Ranger players play a Codex of Inertia. That card's a little bit more fair.
yeah, I think it ultimately comes down to like how good the surrounding cards are, right? Like, if in theory, like, I don't know if this is the case, but in theory, if Azalea ends up, it kind of depends where you believe Azalea will fall, and I'm not exactly sure where she is. If she is, I think people's going to have her on their radar, and they need to have a plan for her. If you're not able to adapt to her and she ends up being like a tier 0 deck that's significantly better than everyone, then yeah, I think this card will get hit. Or if it's like only Codex decks that are viable, I think it will get hit. But I think if we continue to see diverse top eights like what we saw at this Realm Games event, then I think it could potentially be an okay spot. But eventually, yeah, I think that this card is probably going to be too good. It's just
Yeah,
that, I don't know.
it's too early to say, I guess.
Yeah, and it mostly just has to do with like, I mean, I think Assassin and Ranger were pretty clearly a little bit underpowered before, and they've gotten a ton of help this set. But I think giving them this card is different than giving Runeblade this card, for example.
Okay, I can get behind that. Where I'm like trying to like make Assassin playable, and this card is definitely helping that deck out a lot. And I'm pretty happy with this card. But it does feel like this is the like one of the only cards where you're like, oh, you see it in your hand, you go block with the 3 cards in your hand, play the Codex, and like free rolling.
Yeah, one thing I will say about Codex, regardless of like how it ends up affecting the metagame, is that I kind of would have liked the power level to be a little spread out, where maybe Codex of Frailty is a little bit weaker and some of the other cards are a little bit stronger. I think it just makes for some pretty big swings, especially in mirror matches where it can feel a little like a little bit like who draws Codex more. That's not the whole story. There's more that goes on than that, but it carries a very large weight in the mirror matches, and I think it'd be better if it wasn't like that. So that is maybe one thing I'll say about this card is it's a little bit the power is a little bit too concentrated in one card for my taste, but
I'm assuming you're gonna be on Codex of Frailty for the PT. Like I don't know which hero, but most likely Codex of Frailty.
yeah, I think my default place is either play a deck that makes good use of Codex of Frailty or play a deck like, I don't know, maybe Dromai that is very good against Codex of Frailty decks. I think you want to be doing one of the two for sure.
Okay. Anything else you want to talk about Classic Constructed before we move on?
No, not too much to say. Just cool metagame. Hope it stays diverse. Curious to see how things shake out. I do wonder if Azalea's inconsistencies are going to prevent her from being a top tier deck, or if she's just going to be like Starvo tier, like some people seem to think that she is. My gut kind of says that she's not because she can kind of fall apart and she doesn't have like a weapon and armor to fall back on. But who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she is just consistent enough that it doesn't matter.
I can't see Azalea being Starvo level, where Starvo had this absurd thing about Guardian was already good, and then now Guardian had this broken mechanic and got to play more lightning cards that was actually helping the deck out, and got to play Crown of Seeds and all the equipment, and had Winter's Wail that eventually gets banned.
Yeah, for me, the Winter's Whale, Crown of Seeds, and like the blocking armor, like Crater Fist, especially, and Stalagmite or Ram's Head, either one, put Starvo significantly above a deck like Azalea for me. But I can see the comparison. Like when they do their thing, you don't get to play the game, and people don't like that. So I get it, but it's also early. Maybe you can find solutions. I think if you're trying to beat Azalea, I'd look for ways either to disrupt her, because if you can keep her off Arsenal, she's way less consistent, or alternatively, look for cards that don't require your action point to get value out of them. Because I think that ultimately, like if you're a deck that doesn't like Red in the Ledger, if that Red in the Ledger is coming in for 14 and you block for 12 and leak 2 and it like eats your arsenal, that's actually not bad. Like you're okay with that. They probably had to take damage to do that and it's not game ending. What's not okay is if you just get dominated and hit for 11 and then you use one card and like the rest of the or you use one card to block and attack with one card and like most of your hand rots. So I think stuff like Sigil of Solace or maybe reinforce the line as a way to get extra block value out of your hand, or even attack reactions, are all ways that people can explore to just make sure that when you're getting Red in the Ledger, you can at least get some of the value out of your hand.
That's fair. That's fair. So like just the meta game against cards that are commonly played and just play around them essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, let's move on to drafts. How many drafts have you done?
I've done 2 drafts so far. One on the release day, right when we got there. I drafted a pretty interesting Riptide deck, and then I also drafted an Azalea deck in a team draft on the Saturday, I guess, right after the event. How about you?
I played 4 drafts actually. I just remembered. I played one online, and I played 2 on Saturday with the Vancouver guys, and then I played yesterday night at the local game store, Connection Games, and I ended up playing Arachne on the first draft. I tried Ninja or Benji on the second draft, eventually trying Katsu with the same list. The third draft, I played Riptide. I played like a 40 card fatigue variant. Yesterday night, I also played Riptide and eventually turned it into Azalea to try both decks out as well.
Nice. Before we jump into our drafts and some of our takeaways, you mentioned that you drafted online. How did you go about doing that?
There is, I think a lot of people know Talishar by now. They it's connected with fabdraft.com, I think it's called. I was invited by Clay, one of our local guys, to draft with the Savage Land News people. So that's a different YouTube channel that posts flesh and blood content. And those guys were just getting like content creators together to do a draft. It's actually a good place to talk about it. I'm actually doing another draft with them on Thursday on March 30th, and maybe I'll end up streaming it somewhere, or I guess I could just stream it on the YouTube channel here.
Yeah,
But
that'd
yeah,
be
I
really
could do
cool.
that. But yeah, so we're gonna do another draft with like a bunch of content creators. Let's see the names that we have coming up. The guys, at least for now, that we have the list on. We have Clay, who writes on Wraith Times. We have Ethan from Mansant, the YouTube channel. Pankaj from Ethan Smoke, Justin from Team Foundry, Sam from Three Floating, Andrew from Dice Commando, and Nathan from Savage Land News. So it's like a bunch of content creators, and I'm pretty sure it was Nathan who put this everything together. And shout out to him for doing something like this. It was pretty cool.
Nice. That sounds like a really fun event. Yeah, I hope that you do stream that. I would like to watch that. There's a lot of there's a lot of cool content creators there. I recognize quite a few of those people. Okay. You want to talk about our drafts?
Yeah, let's talk about our drafts. I guess I'll go first. Oh, actually, before we talk about our drafts, what do you think the best hero is from your first impression?
I don't really have enough to go off of to say for sure. My gut says that a very good Azalea list is very strong. And I think that a very good Katsu list could also be pretty outrageous with bonds. Or maybe even like a Benji. Like I think like Ninja has like a very, very high ceiling. I just don't know. I don't know how consistently you can get into it, but I've mostly drafted Ranger so far, so it's a little hard to evaluate. But I feel fairly confident that Assassin is not the deck with the highest ceiling, although you can get some pretty good Assassin decks, and they have like a very high floor.
That's fair. That's fair. That's actually not the impression that I got. The After drafting about 4 times, I felt the assassin decks came together the most, and honestly, in almost every pool, the assassin player always went 2-1 or better. At least in all of our draft pods. So I have a feeling that after this format shakes out a little bit, assassin might be the most consistent deck to just end up drafting, because they just have like the largest card pool in this format that is either not playable but like actively good that you want to include in your deck. Unlike Ranger and Ninja, it just has so many cards where I don't want to have some of those cards in my deck.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think that Assassin's going to be the most contested in a pod, and I think there's going to be the most like I think Assassin's always pretty much always going to be a 3 or a 4 of in the pod. And I think it's going to come together the most often. But I guess I feel like those decks are usually pretty solid, but I feel like the very good Ninja and the very good Ranger decks might actually be like the best decks you can draft. It's just a matter of if you can actually get them. And I think if there's too many people fighting over them, um, they get a lot worse pretty quick.
Yeah, that's what I think too. Where if you're the only ninja drafter in the pod, I feel like you're gonna win because all of your cards you're going to hit so hard that people won't be able to stop you. And same with Azalea. But I feel like when you get it contested a little bit, or you get cut the key cards that you're gonna be needing, it might be tough. So I'm pretty excited to draft like maybe like 5-10 more times and see where I end up on this format, where like is it just force assassin, or is it gonna be, you know, where every draft I'm gonna have to see what's gonna be the open lane and go into that open deck.
Yeah, I'm also curious to see that as well. Another thing that I noticed about this set as I was drafting it, I feel like a lot of the generics do not, and even some of the hybrid cards do not fit equally into all decks. Like, I really don't think Azalea wants to be running a whole bunch of traps, for example. And Ravenous Rapple, I think, is very good in Azalea and pretty solid in Riptide and not great anywhere else.
Oh, I don't agree with that. I feel like Red Rabble is one of the best cards in the set. Where I think it's bad in Azuri, and I don't know about Ninja yet. I feel like in Ninja you just want to do better stuff than Rabble.
Yeah, like I think it's fine in Ninja, but I think you just have better attacks in Ninja, and maybe in Arachne it is okay, but it's certainly like I don't think it's just like this generic that fits everywhere and is always great.
Yes, I agree with that. You need to have a red line deck for Rabble to be good, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like one of the more universal ones. I think like I guess like Spring Loaded is pretty flexible. I think it fits into Assassin and it also fits into Ninja pretty well, but it's not great in Ranger. I guess it's okay in Riptide, but you'd probably rather just have an arrow.
Yeah, I don't think it's good in Riptide either. I don't want to be playing spring loaded in any Rangers. I
Yeah.
think it's good in Azuri and Arachne for sure. I'm
Yeah.
not too sold on Ninja yet on this card.
I think it's like playable but not exciting. And I think that there's actually just like a lot of cards that function this way. And because of it, I think what ends up happening is that if you're wanting to draft Ninja and Ranger, I think you need to be picking, you're kind of incentivized to pick those like hard to replace class cards, like often rares, pretty highly. And you might be picking them early over generics. Like I think, for example, like if I'm seeing some like the Lace With cards for Ranger, or I'm seeing like Bonds of Ancestry, or even like the red spinning wheel kick, for example, like I think that you kind of want to be having those cards in your Ranger and Ninja decks to make them really, really good. And I think if you stay, again, like not enough experience, but my gut says that if you stay with too many generics for too long, you're not going to have the best version of that deck.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you said there. Okay, let's dive right in. I'll start with my first draft, which I ended up drafting Arachne on the Fab draft. That draft actually, like, the client glitched out quite a bit, and some people ended up with like less cards than 42, and some people had like 44 cards in their pool, just like a real draft at a local armory. But I'm not sure how that happened or why that happened. And it was pretty interesting to like because everyone was on a Discord call during the draft, and people were just like, "Wait, why am I on pick number 15 of 14?"
That's funny.
Yeah, so yeah, I feel like we ended up drafting the whole pack, but some people didn't get a pick in some of their packs for some reason, and yeah, I ended up with exactly 42 cards. But I know some people with like 40 or 44, and it was pretty funny. I ended up drafting Arachne in that pod, and I think my deck was just solid. I think it was 18 reds. Sorry, I don't have the actual full deck list anymore on hand, but I think I counted 18 red, and most of them were just stealth attacks for 3. And I didn't do anything special. If I had resources floating, I would attack with Spider's Bite. I would block 4 or 6 and attack 4 or 6 back. Ended up going 2-1 with that draft, losing to Azuri in the last match, and I didn't I didn't technically get fatigued, but I basically got fatigued where I was in a point in the game where I was like, okay, I need to no block this to and hope he doesn't have like a 2 cost in hand to have enough cards left in my deck to kill him, and then he just had it, so I died. I feel like Arachne is one of those decks where you need to have red, not Rain Razor. What is that card called? It is Rain Razor? No, Razor Edge.
Oh, the +3 that costs 0 and hits stealth cards.
Yeah, 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 that card. I feel like that's like one of the most important cards in Arachne, where if you get like 2 or 3 copies of this card and then a bunch of like red line stealth attacks, whenever your stealth attacks have on hits, there's like no way they can like effectively block all of the on hits with if you just have one copy of that card.
Yeah, I think I agree that the attack reactions feel like like obviously you want the red stealth cards, but I think you also need the attack reactions in Arachne because if you just go 3/3 and then block with 2/3 blocks, Azuri is going to deck you out. you just don't really have a way to push through. And the threat of activation on her ability in the end game is just, I think, better than your go again in the end game.
Yeah, yeah. I think you're gonna have a problem. I think for you to actually go Arachne, you need to have like multiple copies of no 0 for 3. Your next stealth attack gets +1.
Oh, Prowl.
Yes, if you have multiple red prowls, is probably the biggest reason why you want to be in Arachne, and it's a common. So if you find early red prowls, I feel like you should just like honestly force Arachne, and then you'll have just turns where you go 3 then 4 or 3 then 4 with an on hit like every turn, and that's just hard to beat in this format.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I suspect that even the yellow is like much worse, but still playable if you have the good red stealth cards with the on hits. Because if you go like 2 then 4, I think the biggest thing is like getting the break point
On the on hits.
on the on hits. I think that's the biggest thing. Like, and playing a 2 isn't like, it's worse than playing a 3 go again, but it's serviceable.
And I feel like this is a deck where you want Ravenous Rabble Reds, where if you just play Ravenous Rabble Reds for 4 and just keep on pushing like 1 card 4s, and I feel like this is one of the decks where you want Seek Horizon Reds, you want the 0 for 4 Reds. Obviously, you want Death Touches, you want the Virulent Touch, the one if you get blocked from hand, it makes a blood rot pox token, and this is just the deck where you're presenting very efficient value per card, and you're forcing your opponent to block, and then every time they have a 2 block in hand, they're gonna feel punished.
Yeah, that all makes sense to me, and I think more or less lines up with what I've seen from the deck so far.
Okay, do you want to talk about one of your drafts?
Or actually, maybe the best way to do this is to talk about heroes. Did you draft? Was there any Azuri that you drafted, or?
I have not drafted Azuri yet, actually.
I also haven't drafted Azuri. From what I saw, it was relatively similar to the pre-release decks, a little bit more focused, but largely the same, right? Like you want some stealth cards you can pitch to your daggers, you want stuff to cheat in, reactions are fine, both types of reactions are fine, and the deck just has a pretty high floor. I think it's really very much that like pre-release deck that I think a lot of people saw and were pretty familiar with.
Yeah, I think my opinion on this format right now would be you need a way to beat Azuri and outvalue Azuri in one way or another. And if you can't, you're just not going to win any games in this format.
Yeah, I think I agree. You either want to be able to beat Azuri or you want to just play Azuri yourself. Do you want to talk about Ranger then, since that's what I have drafted?
Sure, let's do that.
Okay, so I'll start with my Riptide draft. This was on the release weekend. I was in a pod of, I believe, 4 Assassin, 1 Ninja, and 3 Rangers. Being the 3rd Ranger did hurt a little bit. This draft was a little bit unusual in that I opened Codex of Frailty, pick one, pack one. So I was for sure not Ninja. And I did see that Ninja was pretty open, but like I also felt like I was getting Ranger cards and there was no way I was moving off of Codex. So yeah, I ended up playing Riptide. Overall, I think that this wasn't a great deck. I had some okay go again, but the biggest thing was that I was on 30 cards. So I was prone to getting fatigued. However, I did actually have a plan to beat fatigue that is not going to be easy to replicate, but hey, if you ever get this 2 majestic combo, you can potentially do it. I pulled it off in 1 game, and then the other 2 games I was honestly just dying and did not play very well and didn't set up my pitch stack properly. But the combo is Codex of Frailty, which allows you to get an attack action from your graveyard, and then Give and Take, which is a 1 for 3 go again. And whenever it's defended by a card, for each card, I think it's whenever it's defended by an action. For each action it was defended with, you can return an action from your discard and put it on top of your deck. And I ended up going 1-2 with this deck, I think largely due to piloting errors. But the end game that I set up was I had 2 pumps. The what is it? The
Scout to peripheries?
Scout. Yeah, Scout the peripheries. So I pumped this twice to make it a 9 power give and take that my opponent has to block. And then when they block it, I can put Codex Scout Scout on top of my deck. And then I play Scout Scout Codex, get back give and take, and then I come in for 9. And you can just loop this.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
that's just the infinite loop, or well, not an infinite loop, but like it's if your opponent's at a low total where they have to block, then you
Yeah,
get to deck them.
yeah, you just gotta loop it.
Oh,
It's really sweet, and I did get to pull it off once, and it felt amazing. I was really sad that I couldn't have. I just like was not playing very well. I was really not feeling well on the Friday night in particular, but yeah, again, double majestic, so not going to come together often. But I think that there's some real sweet stuff that you can do there if you ever see it, and it's cool that Codex puts it into the arsenal, so it works with Scout the Periphery. But you could also use something like Come to Fight with it as well, and that would also work.
wow, that's pretty sick. It's not too easy to get two M's together, but when you do, that's something to that's something to know, honestly, when you have like Codex of Frailty and you get past the what is that card called again? Sorry.
Give and take.
Give and take. Yeah, you get past the give and take, that might just be a slam pick. So you would never deck out.
Yeah, and I think Give and Take is actually probably just a really good card. Like 1 for 3 go again that blocks 3 is pretty reasonable in this format, especially when you consider that if they block it, you put a action on top of your deck. It's like you can do some pretty nasty stuff with this card. And I think even if you don't have the full combo, it's gonna help against fatigue.
That's so true. That's so true. My drafts, I did essentially had two Riptide drafts. I was focused on trying to get a Riptide deck together to see if it would actually work. Long story short, neither of them was a 3-0 deck. I went 1-1 with one of them, and I went 2-1 with the other one. Or I guess technically I went 1-1 with both of them, and then one of the third match I actually switched it to Azalea to see how that would work. And I'm just gonna say this pretty bluntly. I feel like Riptide has a lot of problems, and a lot of it just comes down to if you have anywhere between like 30 and 32 cards, you're just gonna get fatigued by basically every class in the game other than Azalea.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think that Riptide has trouble pushing damage, and even triggering the traps is awkward. Like, I got into points where I had my opponent low, and then they're just like, I'm not going to attack react, or like, I'm just going to avoid giving you stuff that triggers your traps. And I'm like, I can't win.
Yeah, well, I think the traps that are good is the one that's like if they have go again, it gets some kind of thing. The ones where your opponent has to play a reaction, you really can't rely on that one triggering. Those ones are just 0 for 3 blocks.
Yeah, I do think they have a little bit of extra text against Uzuri sometimes, but they also just sometimes don't really activate Uzuri, and you can get kind of stuck with it. So not reliable. When you do get to Blood Rot trap them on their thing that they sneak in, like if they do like a destructive deliberation, you block for 3, then you Blood Rot trap. It's a huge blowout, but it doesn't come up very much.
Yeah, when it lines up, it's really strong, but I feel like all of my opponents were pretty conscious about trying to deck out Riptide, and then they all succeeded in doing so. One of my games where I was playing Riptide versus Azuri, and the game literally came down to the last two cards of both of our decks, and then on one of the turns, Ian was like has 3 cards left in hand and no cards in deck, and goes, "Oh, this arrow, can I full block it and still win? Because you still have an arrow that I can put the arsenal and then activate my tunic. Sorry, not tunic. The silking gi to
Mhm.
actually fire that arrow again." And that was my last 2 cards in my deck. And he found a way to just block just enough to go to 1, and then have 1 blue left in the hand to just swing Spider's Bite to lethal. And it's just like the games do get pretty close, and I feel like if your opponent is going to misplay, you're going to be able to win with these Riptide decks. But if your opponent is just like not tunnel vision, but like pretty focused on fatiguing you one way or another, you're going to have a lot of problems against a lot of people, honestly.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I actually had a very that's so funny that you say that. My one of my Riptide games that I lost to the Zuri who ended up winning the pod was exactly like that. I think they survived with 1 card in deck, and I had no cards, and so I just got daggered to death.
Yeah, it's really funny. On my game, I actually would have won my game if, like, on turn 3, I didn't block with a yellow arrow, to prevent a Blood Raw Pox token or something like that, because I was at like 6 life at the end of the game, and if I just took 5 and kept 1 arrow, I just actually easily win that game.
Yeah.
And No way I would have known that, like, on turn 3 of the game. But that was probably the only spot where I made, like, a quote unquote mistake that could have won me the game. Arrow management and damage management might be very important in this format as a ranger player, or at least as a Riptide player.
My kind of theory on Riptide is I think you want to be as close to mono red as you can, because then you're just getting max value out of the cards in your deck. And I think you ideally want to be playing like 35 cards if you can. So I think the biggest reason to be Riptide is like you just have a lot of good red cards. But I agree that I ended up feeling like most of the time I'm going to want to be Azalea, because often, even if you have good red cards, you can probably still play Azalea as long as you have some pumps, and Azalea feels actually very good in the format, I think.
Did you end up drafting Azalea? Want to talk about that?
Yeah, so I drafted Azalea. I'll talk a little bit about this deck. I think it's actually a pretty good version of Azalea, and there's some pretty big takeaways I got from this draft. Caveat that this was a 6-person team draft where we decided, because it was a team draft and we knew that like teams beforehand. So we were basically, it's 3-on-3 teams. We made the teams beforehand, and then we're sitting alternating. So it's like team A, team B, team A, team B, team A, team B. Because of that, we ended up drafting just 4 packs, also because we had a box. So it's not the most representative draft in terms of what's going on, but I think it does inform sort of like what these decks can look like and how the cards work together. So this Azalea deck has a lot of arrows. I'm on 7 red arrows, 9 yellow arrows, and 3 blue arrows. I think just having a high arrow count is important. They block 3, they present a lot of damage, and a lot of them have on hits. The most important arrows, I think, for Azalea are Spire Sniping to help let you dominate on first cycle. Widowmaker as a closer is really good. I think in particular the yellow one might be the best one because you can easily pitch it to second cycle. It has no attack reactions can be played to it. And it can get turned off by your opponent's equipment. I think if you're playing against Azalea, you want to try and keep equipment for it. But yeah, I think it's a good closer. And then probably the most important arrow is actually Withering Shot, and just access to frailty in general, because I think that basically against Azuri, your plan is you're dominating big arrows into them. And when you do that and you have a high arrow count like this, what ends up happening is that they end up having a lot of cards in hand, which is going to make them want to dagger you and then attack you with a big attack. And if you're just dominating and they're getting to go dagger, dagger, big attack, you're actually going similar on rate. And I think you're really relying on the on hits to make you come out ahead. And in particular, if you can give them frailty to turn off their daggers, it just makes it so that they can't really use their hand. And it makes it so that you're getting full value out of your 3 blocks, which are mostly arrows that get debuffed by the dagger. So I think I have 2 red, 2 yellow, no, 1 yellow. No, I do have 2 yellow and 1 lace with frailty. So those 5 frailties felt really, really important in this deck, just as a way to like turn off those daggers and really kind of come out ahead against Azuri. So I think that that's something you want to be looking for if you want to play Azalea.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think that arrow is just strictly the best arrow. Like, not even the other 2 doesn't even come close.
Yeah, and it's obviously going to be pretty good against Ninja and has some text against Ranger too. So I think it's just the one that you want the most. Blood Rot's still good, and Inertia's
It's an arrow.
whatever. Yeah, it's an arrow. But yeah, that's the one that you want. I have some pumps. I have like 2 come to fights, a red Fletch, a lace, and then I have some toxicities. Toxicity is really strong, I think, in Azalea. It's a ranger or assassin action that has go again, and it gives your next ranger or assassin attack when it hits, the opponent loses 5, 4, or 3 life at red, yellow, blue. This card is really nice in Azalea because of the dominate. It pairs really well with Widowmaker, since Widowmaker turns off defense reactions and is really good in late game stacks. I actually thought that the blue one was incredible just because it's a resource card, and I think the yellow one might be the best one because Azalea functions really well off of yellow pitch. It just makes it really, really easy to stack this together with maybe that Widowmaker that you load a Widowmaker where you Azalea into something and you've pitched your toxicity, and then you already have your stack set up for a late game. So yeah, toxicity, super good card. And just getting like 3 or 4 damage out of your yellow or blue is pretty big game.
Yeah, that can end up being worth a lot. It also might do backfire though, where toxicity it is gonna force your opponent to block, but if they are able to block it out for whatever reason, either peace of mind, brush offs, um, defense reaction from arsenal, armor, whatever the reason is, yeah, if they turn it off, and if they can turn it off, that might just swing the game quite a bit, with toxicity, because you're just not actually putting damage through until it hits, and it's basically turning their 3 block into a 6 block, or their 3 block into a 7 block, which is insane amounts of value.
Yeah, you do have to be careful with it. That's part of the reason I think it pairs well with Widowmaker, is that Widowmaker, you can't play defense reacts to Widowmaker. So I think that Azalea is quite hard to play. I think every game, especially against Assassin, I was having to set up second cycle stacks. Like I had to find a way to chip some damage on first cycle and then set up some second cycle stacks as well. And an important part of setting up that first cycle is access to knowledge on what's on top of your deck. So Ravenous Rabble, Scout the Periphery, and Spire Sniping, all really good at letting you kind of set that up. So that's kind of what I'd look for if you're drafting Azalea. Really, really strong. I think Fisticuffs is also pretty strong in Azalea too, honestly. Just like threatening the +1 to push through like a Blood Rot or something is pretty nice.
Yeah, I've been impressed with Fisticuffs and honestly a lot of the decks. I think on all decks it's pretty powerful. Honestly, Fisticuffs and Arachne is sweet. You attack with a 3 and they sometimes just like, oh, like I can't afford getting a frailty token or something.
Yeah,
And when they clearly respect it, then you're just like, sweet, you don't have to use it. And when they don't respect it, you use it, and their turn can just randomly turn off.
yeah, I found it to be pretty impressive. And I think in particular with just whenever you have good on hits, Fisticuffs value goes way, way up.
Sorry. There's nothing I can really do. Felton, can you shut up?
Oh, it worked.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much it for me from Azalea. I was actually really impressed with this deck. I ended up going 2-0. I didn't play the third game because I think we ended up going 5-1 in the first 2 rounds, our team.
On the team
So,
drop, yeah, that's
yeah.
sweet.
So I didn't end up playing the last round, but I felt like this deck felt really strong, and it wouldn't surprise me if this deck could end up getting 3-0. It felt good enough to be able to do it. I had a lot of like 10 dominate with frailty or something, and it's just and like I get a block with an arrow on that turn or something. Like it was just really solid.
That's fair. That's fair. Let's quickly talk about Ninja. I guess I was the only one who drafted Ninja. I ended up heavily drafting towards Benji's abilities. Long story short, it completely failed, and I would never do it again. So like my deck had, I think, 4 copies of Deadly Dual Yellows. Um, I had a bunch of 2 cost attacks. I had a couple of head jab yellows with the 1/2 punch blues, and a bunch of 3 blocks that I could find, or as many as I could find, any color, and just blue 0 cost to be able to turn on Kodachi. So like what you would expect a very standard ninja deck, is what I had, with just a lot of. Sorry, I'm gonna go close some doors. I'll be right back. Okay, sorry. As I was saying, I had multiple deadly duos and a bunch of just like head jabs, 1/2 punches that was gonna not be able to block, and 1/2 punch is probably the best card with Benji. Can you hear the cat?
Yeah, definitely can hear your cat still.
Oh my god! Just 1 second. Felton, what the fuck do you want? You want a treat? I'll give you some treats. I'll give you food.
We have a special guest on the pod this week. Unexpected but present.
Okay. Okay. I gave it some food. I'm gonna hope it doesn't meow again. Um, As I was saying, something about deadly duels.
Yeah, you said you had a bunch of deadly duos and a bunch of like yellow two powers into like the
Oh yeah, the 1-2 punch, or
1-2
not? It's not one.
punch.
Is it one called 1-2 punch? It's the zero.
Yeah, the one that does 2 damage.
Yeah, on hit does 2 damage. Yeah, so I just had a bunch of those. So like, and I had two red short and sharps. Basically, my plan was to win the die roll, go first, attack for 2, unblockable +3, and then use fisticuffs to 6 damage to put them to 14 on turn 1 and get an arsenal. Which honestly, it happened once, and it
Hmm.
felt really great.
Yeah, Benji seems real good when you get to go first and you're built like that, but when you're not, were you just too far below, right?
Yeah, it just like I did that and I still lost the game because on every other turn, all I was doing was 2 damage, and then they got to block everything else on the turn, essentially. Or like I would get like 3 damage through, and then they just didn't care. My cards just weren't good. And as we said like a couple of weeks ago, Deadly Duo Yellow is just so below rate of what you want to do. It was just so bad. A lot of the cards just pitched for yellow and didn't enable my turns fully.
Yeah, I mean, I think Deadly Duo Yellow is okay.
Yeah,
Does it buff anything, or does the next card have to have 2 or less power too? I forget.
the next attack has to have 2 or less power.
Okay, never mind, never mind. I was thinking that it was like a leg up, but it's actually not because your other card is also under rate. Yeah, I think you just need to draft Benji like closer to mono red, and I think the best Benji decks are going to have a Bonds of Ancestry and a Mask of Many Faces.
Oh, to trigger bonds, yeah.
Yeah, and you just always get your one bonds of, like when you draw it, you just get your one bonds of ancestry for free because you have Mask of Many Faces. I think that's like really where you want to be, and then you're just doing like, I don't know, hitting them, and then like I think like the leg taps are really good because then you trigger Benji, and then your head jabs become fours and they're break points, and I think you just want to be like playing like Fi essentially.
Yeah, I have this I have this theory that maybe like just playing Katsu with the same thing might be better though, because you get 3 more health, and that might just go like that might go longer. Like that might just get you further than if you're Benji and get the +1 damage. The I'm feeling that the +1 damage is actually not that relevant because ninja cards don't have on hits, and the generics that will have on hits is already high powered. So like I'm talking about cut down to size, cut to size. Is it called cut to
Yeah,
size?
cut
Yeah,
down the size. Yeah,
cut down to size and the on hit make a ponder token. They both already have high enough power that like the one extra power on those don't really matter too much. Their on hits aren't really that relevant unless it's what is what is the cat trying to say?
you can't miss it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some kind like this. I'm gonna edit it in a way so there's not that many pauses, but I'm gonna leave some of these cat meows in the pod. It's gonna be part of it now.
Yeah, sometimes it can't be helped. We have a special guest on the pod this week. We just didn't know it. That's all.
uh yes, that's true. And oh my god, it's typically sleeping all the time anyways. And it's awake right now. just how it That's just how cats are, aren't they?
Yeah, pretty much typical cat behavior.
Okay. Well, going back to the ninja discussion, I feel like yeah, just play Katsu. I feel like if you just play Katsu, you'll end up in a better spot than if you're ending to play Benji.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. I think that Katsu is going to be the better deck most of the time. The 17 life just feels like a really big drawback. I don't know. I'm sure that there's probably at least like one way to build Benji that's pretty good, but I feel like I just want to be playing Katsu. I just want the 20 life. I want to not have to worry about the die roll. I want to be playing Ninja because I have like a Bonds and all the sweet combo cards with it. Like,
Yeah, that's I agree with that. And like I wish you can like pick Benji if after the die roll or something like that. Like if you can do that, then I'm gonna be Benji every time I go first, and then I'll be Katsu every time I go second.
that might be a little broken.
But yeah, I feel like Benji just has so many. It just like loses so much going first, like going second, where losing 3 life is a lot. That's like a full card you're down. these games aren't gonna be, because your cards don't block, you can't actually have a game that goes really long. And typically the games that do go long are like the games where you are like surging strike into descending gust waves. And those games are already like, if you do that in Katsu, it's arguably better because now they have an on hit that they sometimes have to respect.
And you have 20 life.
And you have 3 more life, yes.
That's sort of my read as well. I could be wrong. Super early. Maybe people figure out something sweet, but I think Katsu is really where you want to be.
The episode's getting quite long now. You wanna wrap it up?
Yeah, I think we've talked about a lot of stuff this week. Overall, what do you think? Are you enjoying this draft format?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting draft format. We'll have to see if it, once it gets solved, or if it does get solved, and if it's gonna be very stagnant, then it's gonna get boring quickly. But for now, every pick has been very interesting, and I'm still not sure when to pivot or when not to pivot. So I want to try and figure that out as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. And the games just seem pretty solid. I've been liking the gameplay of this set. I like that a lot of the games tend to go a little longer. I suspect some of the best ninja decks will end the game very, very fast, but ninja feels, yeah, I don't know. I don't know how much it will come together. We'll have to see.
Yeah, it's so reliant on Bonds of Ancestry, and Bonds of Ancestry having the reliable targets. It needs both. It can't just have one or the other. It needs both Bonds and the reliable targets for it. It's gonna be hard to put that together. And let's say like two people open Bonds of Ancestry in pack one, and if they both try to force it, then both players are gonna be missing some portion of the deck. I feel like.
Yeah, I kind of feel like that's going to be true too. So I don't know. Interested to see how it shakes out. I think next week we're going to be we're going to be starting to go deep on one of the classes. Not
Yeah.
sure which one. We'll pick one when we have a better idea of exactly what we're most comfortable with, and we have a bit better feel for the format. But we're gonna kind of do either hero by hero or class by class breakdown, maybe depending on like how separate or similar each hero is.
It might be class by class, because I feel like we can do like an hour and a little bit episode of like just assassin, and then just ranger, and just ninja. I feel like it might be better to talk about the differences and like what to avoid for each hero, honestly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Anyways, yeah, that's coming next week. Pretty excited to talk more about that once we've drafted the set a little bit more. But anyways, that's going to wrap us up for this week. As always, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. If you have other experiences drafting, we'd love to know. Maybe if you have seen some sweet Benji decks and you've seen them really perform well, I'd love to hear what that looked like, or just any of your thoughts on the limited format in general. Are you enjoying it? What heroes have impressed you? Is there anything that we missed or were too high on or too low on, or things that you would add? We'd love to hear about all of that in the comments. You can also get in touch with us via social media. You can message Jay on Twitter at UedaJ, and you can message myself on Twitter at YukiLeeBender. We also have an email on the bauble@gmail.com where you can send your questions or feedback directly there if you'd rather use that avenue to contact us. Until next time, have a good night.
Okay, perfect.
Probably don't need to sign off, right? Unless you had something in mind.
No, nothing really important. I was just gonna ask or comment one thing. Oh my god, the cat stopped meowing now. Um, and number two, about how many drafts do you think you're gonna be doing this week?
One,
Just the one stronghold?
probably. I'll probably try to do connections on Monday as well.
Okay, so probably two before next week.
Yeah. I can't go to Infinity, unfortunately.
I don't think there is a draft this weekend, is there?
I don't know. Anyways, if there's anything happening this weekend, I can't do it. So
That's fair. That's fair.
it's my grandmother's 100th birthday. So immediately after getting back from Toronto, I'm flying to Toronto again on Friday. So yeah, I'm gonna be there, and it'll be nice. I haven't seen a lot of that family in a long time, and I'm looking forward to it. But I definitely won't be able to do any drafting. So
Well, either way, happy birthday. 100th birthday's big deal.
yeah,
And
absolutely. I wouldn't miss it for the world. I'm glad to be able to go.
okay, and I guess that would wrap it up for this week.
Bye everyone.